Greetings, everyone, respected members of the board, our distinguished guests, other attendees, and my dear fellow colleagues. Welcome you all to the ASIA Sensemaker session. In ASIA Sensemaker, we have informal conversations, yet they maintain a level of depth and expertise comparable to a seminar setting. Today, we have with us Professor Raghuram Rajan and Professor Rohit Lamba. Professor Rajan is the Catherine Desac Miller Distinguished Service Professor of Finance, University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. Before that, he was the 23rd Governor of the Reserve Bank of India from 2013 to 2016. Dr. Rajan was also the Chief Economist and the Director of Research at the International Monetary Fund from 2003 to 2006. Professor Rajan's interests are in banking, corporate finance, and economic development. He authored and co-authored several books. In 2003, the American Finance Association awarded Professor Rajan the inaugural Fisher Black Prize for the best finance researcher under the age of 40. He was named as one of the Times Magazine 100 most influential people in 2016. We welcome you, sir. We have with us Professor Rohit Lamba. Professor Lamba is the Assistant Professor of Economics at Pennsylvania State University from 2015 till today. He is PhD in Economics from Princeton University. We welcome you, sir. We welcome both of you. Today's discussion is focused on their latest book, Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future. Without further delay, I would now like to call Professor Amogh Rai, to Director Research Asia, to start the conversation.
Thank you, Neeti, and both the professors, welcome to ASIA Sensemaker. So first, for anybody, and a lot of people would be watching it later, this is the book that we're going to be discussing today. A lot of people would have seen, read, and heard about this book in the news. Both of you have been doing a lot of press interviews, briefings, so on and so forth. But the first question that we're going to start this with, Professor Rajan, is from your new book that has just come out, which is Monetary Policy and Its Unintended Consequences. So the conclusion of that particular book is that we are now moving towards a low inflation, low growth world. In this low inflation, low growth world, you also say that central banks do not really understand it very well. Where does this particular world that you see it developing in the next 5 to 10 years, how does India navigate this? So
that's a fantastic question, right? One of the virtues of writing books is you can have entirely separate arguments, all self-contained in the book, and you're trying to connect arguments. Well, it is an important point, right? The low growth, low inflation world is a possibility. I think, obviously, there are other possibilities. For example, those who are heavily sort of enthused by AI and its, and its functions, think that maybe you could get a spectacular increase in productivity, which would increase supply possibilities. Of course, you also need demand to keep pace, but they think growth could be higher for that reason. But that seems to be the only possibility, other than perhaps the world waking up to the need for massive green investment. If you put those two out and say, it's going to be hard to get the world to cooperate, because a lot of the green investment has to happen in emerging markets and developing countries, and that requires a lot of cross-border financing. If you put those out, then what we have are the headwinds: the deglobalization, the aging, the effects of climate, which are negative, the catastrophes, the floods. We saw one in Chennai recently. So if that is the case, then growth is going to slow. And then the question comes, how as a country does India navigate all this? And importantly, and that's where we start the book, that the old ways of growth are also drying up. If you think of the old way of growth for an Asian economy, it was focus on exports, using your cheap labor, and somehow expand very quickly because there's global demand. And over time, because of scale, you employ more workers, and you use the profits from this low-skilled labor arbitrage because you're competing with rich country workers to upskill, to improve education, to improve healthcare, and then move up the value chain. And eventually, you move from assembling textiles or doing textiles and assembling electronics to actually producing chips. Okay, so that's the path. The problem, however, is that that path is no longer easy. Three constraints that you can emphasize. One is that it's become much more competitive. That it's not that you're competing with rich country workers. You're competing with either the robots or you're competing with Chinese and Vietnamese workers who have the benefit of having added significant amounts of skills and capital over time. The second, I think, problem is that there is growing protectionism in the West. And that is another problem, that they simply don't want to see another China come and take away all their manufacturing industries. They also have a certain amount of manufacturing fetishism. They want to hold on to manufacturing. You saw this most recently in the US excluding or at least putting some frictions in the way of a Japanese steel company taking over US steel. They want to maintain their steel industry, even though Japan is a friend. And so that's the second, I think, big constraint in going the manufacturing route. The third, I think that's very important, is that there is really no rationale anymore for having to climb up the value chain, starting with the lowest end and moving up. As it is in the lowest end, there are no profits because you've competed it away. But on the other hand, at the higher ends, and this is what we call the smile curve in the global supply chain, early parts of the supply chain, lots of intellectual property put into designing the product. Think of the iPhone. Lots of value in designing it, in the R&D, the patents that go into it. Then there's production, and then there's the end point, which is the marketing, the content, the financing, all that. And Apple in the iPhone owns the two extremes of the value chain, not the middle. And yet it is incredibly profitable. And so what we're saying is, let's not abandon manufacturing. By all means, continue what you can, but don't subsidize it, assuming that this is the only way to grow in a huge way. Don't subsidize it in a huge way. And I'll give you an example shortly of the subsidies, so Rohit can give that. But really focus instead on where you already have some advantages, which is on the two ends of the supply chain. If you own those parts, you can own the middle also. In other words, start focusing on how to make products that have global markets. And then perhaps the manufacturing will come anyway. But we already have people who are designing those products for other companies around the world. Start thinking how they can design it for Indian companies. And that means a whole set of things we need to do. We're not going to move from where we are today to having NVIDIAs and Qualcomms tomorrow. But we can do it in perhaps a more reasonable time than moving up the manufacturing ladder as China did.
Professor Lamba, is there something that you would want to add to this?
No, all good. Yeah, fine.
Rohit, you may want to give the Micron example.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so one of the things that Raghu was saying was that prioritizing resources, because we are still a relatively poor country, is very important. And we've been saying this quite a bit, that it's not manufacturing versus services so much as to trying to understand where we have a comparative advantage and sort of nudging resources towards that. So one of the examples we have in the introduction of the book is of India subsidizing heavily a fabrication plant of a third, fourth generation memory chip in Gujarat, where the central and the state government together are putting in about $2 billion, which is around 16,500 crore rupees of subsidy. Now, this amount is more than 1/3 of the entire higher education budget of India, which is around 44,000 crores for last year. So if you just put it in perspective, right, what is the yearly allocation to all the IITs, IIMs, TIFR, Indian Institute of Science, and so on? More than 1/3 of that is being given away as subsidy to this plant, which is arguably going to generate 5,000 jobs. So in terms of what our priorities should be, if our priorities should be that we do want to enter the supply chain of chip design, which both Raghu and I think we should we be trying to enter it at the level of fabrication, which needs to be heavily subsidized, or at the level of chip design, which anyways 20 to 25% of it is already happening in India? And if you agree with our proposals, then what we should really be investing money in is in setting up world-class universities with cutting-edge computer science departments, which will produce more engineers that are adept at chip design. So this is just an example of how egregious misallocation of resources can be. Just to put this number into further perspective, the entire fertilizer subsidy in India, not that we are saying that fertilizers are not important, that they should not be subsidized, but just in terms of where the resources of the government are going for the last budget. The budget is just about to come. The government will make the new budget for the next year. The last year when they made the budget, 2.25 lakh crore rupees were allocated to fertilizer subsidy. Remember, the entire education budget of India, primary, secondary, higher education, was 1 lakh crores. So more than double of that is going into just the fertilizer subsidy in the government's bill.
Right. No, that's an interesting point.
Just to clarify, the budget that Rohit is talking about is the central government budget.
It's a central government budget. So 1 lakh crores is the budget of the central government.
Yeah.
For higher.
I mean, this time I think because of the election, will just be a vote on account, but we'll have a budget later on. But this is a fascinating point, and you use the Gandhian lens of having the reader-editor thing from Gandhi's Hind Swaraj. So think of me as a reader here. I'm not getting into an argument about the specifics or the conspecifics of this structure. But here's the thing. India is in the middle of a geopolitical dividend, if you will. Look at it from whatever aspect you will. So the argument is, would it not be a good time to kind of build up getting into the manufacturing thing? And for this, I'm looking at the World Bank Enterprise Survey, which reported that with a larger intellectual property framework in the country, 45% of surveyed firms, they have reported product innovations. 68% of these were new to the market when they did the survey. This survey is slightly dated though. I don't think they have updated it. And then process innovation was higher at 48%. Why do you think, and I agree with the point that both of you make, why do you think that manufacturing would come at the cost of services? Is that an argument you're making, or am I missing something?
No. This is a misunderstanding, right? What we're saying is, don't put enormous subsidies into manufacturing, saying that that's the only way people will come. Then what happens when the subsidies go? And have you measured how much you're giving in subsidies in order to get people to turn the final screw in India, right? I mean, look at the investment that is happening in some of these schemes and ask the question, is it worth the subsidies we are giving, right? So all we're saying is this, that, by all means, create better workers by training them better. Match their skills to the companies by doing more specific training, get the companies to train them, make land acquisition easier, improve power, improve infrastructure. I mean, some of these things the government is absolutely doing, such as infrastructure. But this is the fundamentals. Improve the fundamentals and we will get strong manufacturing. We're not against manufacturing. We need all the jobs we can get.
Right.
But if you look at, and importantly, don't keep raising tariffs and when, whim takes you, because the thing that businesses hate the most is uncertainty. And if you keep moving it up and down, changing policy, or we don't like you so much, we're going to put these restrictions on you, then obviously it's not a good conducive environment. But important to remember that, in a sense, these are the basics for any kind of growth that you want. And that's why so much of the book is focused on improving our human capital. One of the things we hear manufacturers in India saying again and again is we can't find workers. How can you not find workers when there's, go to every corner of every town, you find a whole bunch of people hanging around? And the reason is that there is no match between the skills available and what the employers want, right? So there is a process of upgrading skills to match the jobs. We also need to create jobs for the skills we have. And we have some ideas in the book. For example, even on the process of expanding human capital, it doesn't mean all, professors from MIT. It can mean improving the worker in the Anganwadi, having an additional worker who's a mother of one of the kids who teaches the children alphabets because she's a 10th class pass and knows how to do that. So we need to think both ways, upskill and also create more jobs for the skills that we have. What we think is a problem is the sense somehow ingrained in so many people who should be a little cleverer about it, that we have to go through manufacturing if we are to grow. That there is no alternative. The only jobs for the unskilled are in manufacturing. That is nonsense. There's jobs in. We've grown in jobs only through services. One of the biggest sources of jobs is your security guard, which is a totally unskilled service. What he needs to do is keep awake, right? There are many jobs like that in towns, cleaners, sweepers. We can upgrade all of them by all means. But to say that there are only jobs for the unskilled in manufacturing is a misreading of even the way India has grown. That said, we are absolutely not against manufacturing. Now, last point. It seems like the China plus one, the geopolitical strategy you talked about, should be a really important way we can get a whole lot of manufacturing. But China plus one flows are going to Vietnam, they're going to Mexico, and much less coming into India. You look at FDI over the last 2-3 years, it's come off, right? And people say, yes, everything, it'll come back. That's true of every number. It can always come back. But let's understand why it's not, moving strongly. And it does mean that we have to do more on improving the business environment, whether it's improving worker skills or improving the quality of policy making that businesses from outside experience here.
Right.
So just to quickly add to that, I think this is a natural question that you asked, especially when we frame the argument in the way we do. But I think it's very, very important to understand that what we are saying is that there is a certain kind of intellectual laziness in thinking that this is how growth happens. Both from our past experience and from what future growth looks like. This is kind of how Raghu was laying the foundation in response to your first question, is it both point towards kind of shrugging off this intellectual laziness. This is the only way we can grow, or is it the only way anybody can grow? And I think what India can do is really provide an example for many other countries, especially in Africa and other developing countries, about how they're going to grow in the future. And I think this mindset change is what we are trying to encourage, and that somehow you don't need to go down, push up from the below the value chain, but you can actually try to capture some of the top parts of the value chain and pull up from there.
Right. No, as I said, this is an interesting argument, and I concur with most parts of it. But something that I stare at, and that is something that Professor Rajan, you will be better placed to answer than almost everybody else here and beyond, even for that matter. How do we finance it? So RBI released an interesting report last year saying that the capital formation is coming down, savings are coming down. How do we finance this vision that we have for like India as a larger services economy of 5 trillion? I think a 5 trillion economy can be taken out of this for now, but where is the money going to come from? And that is something that is not in the book, because this is not an economics book, but rather a book about ideas about India.
Let's talk really about how you get resources, right? Some of this is relatively cheap. And your Micron investment could fund a lot of Anganwadi workers for some time. But the point is that we need to start thinking about where the maximum bang for the buck is. Early childhood, education is so important. Again and again, we've seen in various contexts. So, putting that Anganwadi extra worker in the Anganwadi might seem like a trivial thing, but it could improve school scores, which is one of our banes. Why is it a bane? Because if the child is not doing well in second, third, fourth grade, it understands very little going forward and drops out. And when we're talking of 2047 as when we'll be a developed country, how many dropouts can we afford at that point? And today's dropout will be part of the labor force then. So we need to start improving the quality across the board. It is not rocket science, and it need not be very expensive. Look at some of the improvements the Delhi government has done to the schools and to the local clinics. But that's, you can do some of that across the board. So that's one. Second, there are many places where if we get it right, this can be a self-sustaining industry in its own right, the process of improving human capital. Take, for example, the fact we send 7.5 lakh students abroad every year to get an education, right? Let's say they pay, $50,000 a piece, right? Some of them get scholarships, but today, a year in a university in the US is $100,000. Let's say they, so 50,000 times 7 lakhs, do the math. That's a lot of money, right? I mean, we just looked at the LRS for education that is spent every year. It's about $6 billion. And obviously there's much more that's being spent from other sources. So think about creating a better colleges. That would be an import substitution industry, right? Because I mean, think of exporting your kids abroad as essentially imports. You're paying for that in dollars. And if you keep them domestically with good colleges, you immediately save on the foreign exchange outflow. You save on resources, and you actually are creating value added in this country. What does that require? That requires improving the quality of our colleges so that those 7.5 lakh that go, many of them are willing to stay behind. I mean, I've worked with a couple of colleges like this, and I know it is possible. ISB now is training a lot of Indian students and is regarded as one of the best MBA schools, certainly in India, but also people from abroad come and hire. Another university, Kriya, which is an undergrad university. And again, we are trying to keep those kids from going abroad with a splendid education domestically. It's possible, but it needs focus. And what we're saying again and again is education, healthcare. These are the things that come up at election time. Let's put out some scheme, but are not the steady focus, except in decentralized governments like Kerala or decentralized governments like Delhi, where you can actually make a difference on these and see the rewards at election time. So, I mean, there's a lot in the book to unpack, but it's also how we make these front and center politically. And part of the answer is decentralization in governance.
This is a very interesting thing. In fact, there is sort of a question there that I wanted to ask you, but now that you brought it up, I'm going to be speaking 3 words in Tamil, and hopefully my pronunciation is not deadly. You talk about a particular policy that you have been instrumental in advising the government of Tamil Nadu, Ilam Tedi Kalvi. Hopefully I got that right. But there is something else in the book as well. You would not imagine in India that the government is missing. But in the book, you cite Devesh Kapoor and others. And the both of you make an interesting point that as you keep on going down the decentralization chain, the government keeps on disappearing. For this particular scheme, there are approximately 200,000 volunteers who are going to schools in Tamil Nadu, and they are taking these remedial classes post-COVID. States like Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, the states that you say are not investing enough in human capital, why is this not a policy prescription that is easily adaptable to them? And where does this missing government go and why?
Rohit, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. See, UP is a unique example in the sense that UP is the fifth largest country in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So to have the imagination that you can actually govern UP from Lucknow is just a pipe dream. And it's independent of who is in power, whatever government, right? Just the structurally how government is structured. Well, the historical reasons also why, UP had a weak state and so on. But I think UP out of all places actually is desperately needs significant decentralization, not just of power, because power without funds means nothing, but also of funds and an ability to actually raise your own funds and so on. So I think, one can go into a variety of reasons, initial conditions, being landlocked in how modern trade took place, um, and so on as to why UP is the way it is. But I think going forward for us, it's a no-brainer actually that the only way you can actually turn a very large piece of land like UP around is by just see, we've tried for so long controlling power in state capitals, right? Like, if we decentralize it, and we give various examples in the book, that's really our best hope of improving basic things like health and education in a state like UP. Jharkhand is a slightly different example because it comes under the purview of what economists call the resource curse, right? So it has is very mineral rich. Um, it is very forested and so on. But again, because of initial conditions, because of the way, I mean, Jharkhand was, part of a much larger state earlier. So it has suffered these problems of government that is too centralized. Um, and and the way these people turned around, and people like Jean Drèze and stuff have written about it, is actually to let local people demand health and education for their own communities, and let them actually handle health and education in their own communities. There's a whole another debate about how industry will come there and so on. But just at the level of improving the human capital of people, whether the human capital stays within Bihar, within UP and Jharkhand, or actually it's exported to elsewhere in the country, a basic premise. All industry doesn't need to go set up in one place, right? So if you look at most countries like the US or Europe, industries are not spread all over the landmass. They're spread to different specialized areas where people move to. What India is unique, which you're pointing out actually, is that even though certain regions of the country are growing, the significant portion of the population are still actually in the regions which have the lowest growth rate. So in this sense, India is broadly an anomaly in large countries. So and really what we repeatedly say in the book is the only way to break this is to have a renewed emphasis on public service delivery in these states.
Right. But we get back to the old problem about public services delivery. So when you talk about public service delivery, one of the most important components in that is who chooses which services to deliver and where. And are there some policy prescriptions that we could be looking at? Because you do refer to some, I think Peru comes up as one of the places. Is there something else that we could be developing here? How do we actually decentralize?
So I think there is a certain kind of I know where you're coming from. There's a certain kind of defeatist narratives that can take us over. That it's so difficult, the problem is so large. Where do we even begin? But again, we can look for examples both within the country and outside, right? So if you just look at COVID, for instance, right, we did terribly in managing the second wave, but we did reasonably well in vaccinating our people. Why is that? Because we have an institutional memory of vaccinating people in India. It was not that during COVID we suddenly decided that we need to have a vaccination machinery. Why I'm giving this example is that because one of the most successful campaigns at the level of state and society was the polio vaccine campaign in India.
Yeah.
And so what we try to argue in the book, and then we give the example of Peru, as you're pointing out, with respect to malnutrition, which is a huge problem actually in the states that you're pointing out, is that it is with that level of mission mode, which is what Peru did. They realized actually that even with greater urbanization and even actually with increased education of women, the problem of malnutrition was not going down as much as it should, given their per capita income. So they actually took it on in a way not that dissimilar from how India took on in mission mode the campaign to vaccinate every child for polio in the country. So both, and then many examples. We just give the example of Peru, which actually World Bank has very interesting case studies of Thailand, Vietnam, which had our level of malnutrition, but they realized that they also made it a national shame. So it was actually considered a big shame for a local organizer if the malnutrition numbers were very large in there, which it should be, right? It's a question of our children. So what we're trying to argue in the book is that it is actually possible. We have done it. Other countries have done. We have done it in other contexts, and other countries have done it in specifically in the case of malnutrition. And this really should be taken on in a mission mode. India currently has, according to the last National Family Health Survey, 35% of malnutrition children in the country. And again, as to what Raghu was saying, the states like Kerala are at around 5-6%, which is at the OECD levels, whereas some of the northern states are above 40%, which is at the sub-Saharan Africa level.
Right.
I mean, the other sort of related point is what gets measured gets acted on.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we suppress statistics about these things or say this is not a serious statistic, the more we have economists questioning whether Indians have different malnutrition numbers. We sort of push this under the carpet and focus on the 10 trillion economy and 35 trillion economy. I think what we're trying to say in this book is you can't become a developed country without actually getting the fundamentals right. And it doesn't matter whether it's services, manufacturing, the fundamentals are really the healthcare and the education of your people. If you have 35% malnutrition today, I mean, we know the kind of harm that malnutrition does. You're basically talking about a large part of your workforce in 2047 being stunted and unable to actually do a good day's work. In a world where AI is going to be so much more active, where robots are going to be all over the place, how do you expect to actually have a country that works at that point? So what we're saying is politicians better wake up quickly to the fact that all this talk about, Viksit Bharat, etc., makes sense only if you get the fundamentals right. And the fundamentals are the kinds of things that, the governments like Kerala and Tamil Nadu have focused on over time. I'm not saying this particular government, but over time. And we need many more states in India to do that. And the center to give them a supporting hand when the state is not capable on its own.
One of the, I think, sort of the challenges that you point to in the book is the sort of a tug of war, if you will, between the union and the state governments when it comes to finance commissions. How do you see that kind of playing out in the next 4 to 5 years in terms of, where money has to be allocated? And after the institution of, I think one of the important reforms has been GST. But what GST has also been able to kind of do is take away some of the financial abilities of state governments to. So how do you see this panning out, especially with this development paradox?
I mean, certainly we are asking for states to do a lot more because for example, education is centrally in their purview. But of course, some of the big national institutions like the IITs are in the purview of the center. So it has to be both hands clapping, not just one side. I think what is important is to recognize that, every finance commission till the 15th devolved more to the states. The 14th was particularly chaired by Dr. Y.V. Reddy, was particularly emphatic. And since then, the center has tried to roll back the kind of devolution that has taken place. And, while talking the language of cooperative federalism, I think it's very important that we have true cooperative federalism, which is not just decentralizing to the states, but further, the states themselves have become a blocking point, right? As Raj Chalaya said, everybody wants devolution, but only up to their level. So the states have essentially stopped the creation of the third level, with a few exceptions, again, Kerala being one example. So we need further funds to be devolved. Now, of course, here's where, again, you have a whole lot of people jumping up and saying, oh, there's corruption. Oh, the third layer will not be able to deliver. And, every country has been through this discussion and had the same arguments again, third layer will not be able to deliver, and found that the third layer actually delivers. And as you said, that's the missing layer in India. And that's where our public services are very poor, not just because they, for a variety of reasons, we haven't emphasized them, but also the demand from the bottom up doesn't know where to sort of put pressure. If my teacher doesn't show up at my local school, I mean, I can't go to the panchayat and complain because the teacher is paid by Lucknow. So the state capital is 200 miles away. Am I going to go and go there to say, look, this person is terrible? I mean, you need local sort of points of control over the whole process of public services provision, and that means more decentralization. We say it's not a an accident that the ARP government has focused on improving the quality of the schools and the quality of the healthcare, because that's very visible. And people then, when they've gone to a mohalla clinic, which is actually air conditioned in the middle of summer, and seen a doctor because the doctor actually shows up, I mean, that adds value, so they can see some immediate benefits electorally. So I think that we emphasize the need for this, but it also implies that funds have to be devolved, not just to the states, but further from the states to the municipalities and the panchayats.
This is very interesting. One of the board members of ASIA, Professor Nag, has a book here, just came out, From Here to Denmark. So here is any place in Denmark is this place with good institutions. And one of the arguments in the book is that there are three fellow travelers. One of those fellow travelers is the civil organizations, and the world over, be it South Asia, be it Africa, be it United States, North America. Civil society and voluntary organizations, especially the ones that work at the interface of supplying data, are under more and more attack. How, and of course, I'm not asking you to give a solution to this, but how do we kind of create this fear away from this kind of data-based accountability? Because everybody now wants to up and challenge your data. If I don't like your data, I'm going to say that, oh, you don't know enough about it because you are based in Chicago. If I don't like Professor Lamba's data, I might say, oh, he doesn't know, he's in Penn State. How do we actually agree on data?
The assumption is somebody sitting in Delhi has a much better sense of the data than
absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the truth is we have to collect better data, right? I mean, take, for example, the periodic labor force survey and its measurement of unemployment. Huge issues with that, as Pranab Sen, the former chief statistician, has suggested, right? What does it mean to be employed? And in fact, I mean, if you take the sense that, oh, we have only 3% unemployment,
right?
And then you look at what the productivity of these jobs are, and you say, actually, we haven't grown in productivity at all. In other words, even with bad data, you can make some sort of connections, which suggest that, this is really bad data. How can India growing at 7% not have grown in productivity? That means most of these jobs aren't real jobs because they're not producing anything. That means it's basically disguised unemployment or masked unemployment. I mean, you can do some forensic stuff like that, but there is no excuse for not collecting better data. And I think every economist worth their salt has said, we need better data. Of course, the problem is that, if you actually collect data on unemployment, it might show that, India is not as shining as you thought it was, that you have real problems you have to fix. It's far more convenient to say everything is shining, everything is good, or there are only naysayers who are saying we're not in a developed world already. And the problem is this can continue for some time. And we keep making the analogy to the Soviet Union, where everybody knew that the data were all fudged, but nobody wanted to stand up and say, I'm not saying that it's fudged in India. I'm saying everybody knew in the Soviet Union that the data were all fudged. In India, the problem more is we don't collect enough good data to be able to have a good sense of where we are. But eventually, the Soviet Union sort of collapsed on the basis of the fragilities that had built up. And I think what is important is in India, we should ensure that doesn't happen by figuring out where our problems really are and fixing them directly, not assuming them away by saying, oh, this data source says that's not a problem. And that's why I think, we need good data, but we also need the ability to do research on that data, to publish it, and not have a huge pushback. I mean, that is why you need universities where academic positions are protected, as opposed to universities where academics get challenged by politicians for their findings and told they are anti-national. That's not where we want to go as a country.
Right. Absolutely. But in this, so a last question before I open it up to a lot of people, because we have you for the next 20 minutes. You talk, the both of you, in the book about GCCs, the ability of Indians to speak in English, and that giving somewhat of an advantage. In the next 5-6 years that we have the demographic dividend for, where do you see most of the challenges when it comes to these, the dream of GCC coming in from? Because there are a bunch of reports from NASSCOM, et cetera, putting it at, $110 billion industry, so on and so forth. But the challenge is that you do not have a lot of good universities. And although the NEP is trying, it is trying in a very narrow set of principles to kind of create an ideal world-class university.
I mean, so I think it's an important question. I don't think we're at the saturation point of what India can do in this very specific question that you asked about global capability centers. I think this is just going to grow much in a much bigger way. But you are right that we will hit an artificially constrained saturation point if we don't produce more and better quality IT, engineers, consultants, managers, and so on. And I think this actually is not that hard to fix. I mean, in the sense, ideally speaking, that we should be able to, both at the level of the government and at the level of collection of private people like Raghu is involved in Kriya, to be able to given a relatively free rein to open universities. It's not like the government is not going to ensure that we set up more, government is not the only player that's going to ensure that we set up better universities. We already have a lot of good universities, which are at the bastion of various kind of political tug of wars right now. We must ensure they don't go bad. And the NAP actually, it does talk about, you're right that it's sort of high level in terms of suggesting its suggestions on higher education, but a lot of it is just getting out of the way. If you look at how the UGC is structured, if you look at how the National Health Commission is structured when it comes to setting up of doctors, we shouldn't have to go to Ukraine. Our kids shouldn't have to go to Ukraine and countries, in Eastern Europe to get education in medicine. So this actually is, at least we think, is a relatively fixable problem. Because India set these places up even when it was poor. Think of our IITs and IIMs where Raghu went to, Delhi University where I went to. These were fairly good, at least teaching universities. And I think this is what will supply the high-tech professionals that are going to occupy global capability centers. And I think, and Raghu keeps saying this, the labor arbitrage for this is so huge because you have to, my students, Raghu students, because they're MBA, they get even higher salaries. Even my students in Pennsylvania, when they are hired as a consultant, are hired at around $150,000. And you can get the same work to be done at around $40,000 to $50,000 in Hyderabad or Bangalore. So just in terms of the pure labor arbitrage that is there, these jobs are not going anywhere. They're only going to increase, and India must be prepared to supply the talent for it.
And we must have that negotiation with the West that it can be win-win. That, for example, in telemedicine or in health tourism, this, National Health Service in the UK is just unable to provide services for its people. And for them to get the level of immigration of doctors that they need to expand that is going to be really tough in a short period. On the other hand, if they use the health services of India, we export telemedicine and we provide health tourism from India. And I've a couple of examples of that in just the days I was in Chennai the other day. I mean, these are places where we can expand hugely. What we are saying is we need these are the places that Gurcharan Das says grows at night because the government is not paying any attention. And to some extent, what we need to do is recognize that this is also a way to grow. And in a sense, the book is a plea to say, don't get fixated on the old path as the only way to grow. Importantly, however, if you pick this new path, you got to also recognize that democracy is not dispensable. It's something we desperately need to strengthen and keep because it is going to be an aid to this way of growth.
Right. But democracy, if by different parameters, if very broadly defined, can be argued that is doing well. The challenge here would be that how do you kind of get the three levels of government to speak with each other? But my last question, and before I open it up, there is a lot in the book where you speak specifically about health. One of the biggest challenges is that India also has a graying economy. It's not just a demographic dividend. Is our health sector set up for a rapidly aging economy as well? And there is no policy prescription, at least that I could find, when it comes to that.
Well, we didn't want a 1,000-page book. We wanted so there are many issues we have not touched upon, which are important, absolutely. Aging, yeah, we have a population, a demographic dividend, which will take us till about 2045, 2050, at which point it starts turning the other way and we start shrinking labor force, at least on current path. Of course, if we get richer faster, will shrink sooner because wealth is the greatest contraceptive. I think that what you're saying is there are areas we need more focus on, but I think it's part of the broader point that we're making that we need to constantly re-examine the kind of public services we provide because government is important. We don't want to everything in this book is about how government and business can work together and have to work together rather than one is more important than the other. And I think as far as aging goes, yes, the private sector is starting to pick up with with more health facilities, etc. But this is targeted only at the very upper middle class people.
Prohibitively expensive.
Right. What about the ordinary middle class, especially as nuclear families get smaller and, divorce rates increase. And we have a lot of, especially lonely men and women who are older and who don't have children. Increasingly in the South, yes, you have a lot of couples who don't have children. And those are going to be issues that we need to focus on. But yeah, it was a step beyond what we did in the book.
That's right. So perhaps a second version of this. All right. So now, thank you for doing this. We are now going to be opening it up to people. You can ask a question, you can write it in the chat box, or you can just take the initiative and go ahead. But we have Professor Rajan for another 12 minutes. And then it'll be Professor Lamba.
Sorry, may?
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely, loud and clear, sir. Please,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Well, first of all, Professor Rajan, Professor Lamba, brilliant book. Heartiest congratulations. I was just wondering, when you write such a book, which I think there are many here who find it absolutely brilliant, as I said, and all of it very appropriate. Do you have the feeling sometimes that you're preaching to the converted? And have you had people who don't believe in this actually talk to you and say the policymakers and others? I know you've done many, many interviews and very well attended interviews in Delhi. But when you were here, have you been invited by policymakers and others to come and say, hey, tell us, we sort of, we haven't done quite what you're saying, and why should we? I just wondering if you have had any chance of changing hearts.
Look, I think my experience of policymakers is typically stuff sits on a shelf and grows until one day the policymaker says, "Hey, maybe we should look there and see what makes sense." There are obviously policymakers who are very much on this in this spirit, and I talk to the government of Tamil Nadu people. I talk to some other people. The center has its own path, and some of this. I mean, I don't think some of this is contradictory, but some is, and therefore, if they were open to discussion, obviously we would be very happy to discuss. But generally, policymakers like to think that they're doing the right thing. It takes time for stuff that is different to seep in, and eventually it comes in not necessarily from the person at the top, but from people below who say, "Hey, this makes sense, and maybe we should do more of it." So we're hoping to get a wide readership, not just of the converted. In fact, we don't think a lot of people sort of were converted in the first place, but we hope that we don't sort of antagonize those who are willing to, with an open mind, read it. And that's one of the reasons why some of the criticism of the current path is buried in chapter 13, which some people have told us is the most important part of the book, but we don't think so. And this goes back to, we first wanted to offer a model of what can be done differently and why the two pieces of governance and economic activity fit together. And then we wanted to say, okay, what about the current path? What's different about it? Why do we think there's a problem? But if we started with that, those people on the quote fence that we want to talk to would simply say, no, this is just, I don't want to listen to this. And that's why we put it in chapter 13 rather than as chapter 1.
So
Yeah,
we hope
I think
so,
we were
Dr. Rajan,
we were
Dr.
actually
Lamba.
we were actually quite keen when we were writing the book, as you were saying, not to talk just to the already converted, which was very much on our minds and on our agenda to at least engage with people, in ideas that they might find, opposite to what they think is the right for the country and the economy. So that was very much on our minds.
Certainly, we wish you good luck in that, because I think that's exactly what we need. Amogh had briefly flashed a book that I've just finished, From Here to Denmark. And Professor Rajan, you will find a lot of echo in it of your book, The Third Pillar, in which you talk about the three pillars. And I've sort of called it three travelers and all of that. But again, it was just launched in Delhi. And I hope you'll get a chance to read it, and I'll have the benefit of your reactions. But again, there's a talk there, of course, as you would expect, a lot of things about the community being involved, from the third pillar, as you had called it. I've called it third traveler. But really, how does the demand come? And it's a symbiotic relationship. And many of us here in India, I'm based in Delhi, but we work on a large platform in Asia. The challenge we have is getting the community itself to demand something which is its right. It's not a favor being granted to them. It's a long haul, but I must say that there are evidences of very positive results, but at a still microscopic level. And what I found very interesting, Professor Rajan, Professor Lamba, when I was writing that book and presenting it to various people, the argument was, look, and this is not just in India. Our book is not India specific. It's really more global. People said, look, we all understand the importance of good governance. We all agree with everything you said. The question is not why should we do it, but how to do it. And I must say that I personally found your book this latest book that is, very, very interesting, because difficult as it might be, it actually talks about what to do. You make a case of why to do it, but what to do. But again, the efforts continue, and we look forward very much to your book being sort of read and practiced by a large number of people. So thanks very much again for writing this book and sharing all your knowledge, but also talking about it so openly and very broadly. Thank you very much.
Well, it's people like you who make our day, right? Who make it feel that it was worth it because there's somebody listening. We also get our quota of trolls. The broader point to what you just said is, I think there's a great aversion to decentralization, often from the bureaucracies themselves. But even amongst thinking people that, what this will do in the US, for example, it is if we let local people choose, they'll start teaching they'll start teaching creationism. They'll abandon evolution, and they can't be trusted. And there's a deep sense of elitism embedded in this, that somehow, yeah, that may be true, but let them make their mistakes, because they'll find that their kids don't get jobs when they only know creationism. They can't get any jobs in biology. And eventually the kids will say, I don't want to learn this stuff. The revolution will happen domestically in that neighborhood. The point is that, you have to have some faith that giving people power, they will manage it appropriately. The other version of this used to be, give people money and they'll blow it on drink, right? And again, we've seen that doesn't happen. They spend it on better nutrition for their kids, maybe better schools and so on. And I think you have to be profoundly democratic to understand that, you're not going to go into ruin by doing this. Yes, and this was Ambedkar's concern, that local elites will capture everything. And maybe that was more of a concern then, but now we have better information technology. We have a certain ability of the center and the state to regulate local elections. So you can in a sense, tackle the issue of capture head on. And if you have a free press, the press can also document these situations of capture. So that's no longer, in my view, a important reason to prevent the third pillar or the third traveler from actually gaining strength. So I think this is a right moment to change. Anyway, let me stop.
You have three questions and 3 minutes. So I'm going to take the shortest one first. It's a question from Sanjeev. What's your take on the concept of startup / charter cities? How relevant are these concepts for India?
Let me answer that, then leave the other two to Rohit.
Right.
Look, it is true that we will have a lot of urbanization going forward, right? If we are developing at the pace that we are. And everything can't be built around existing cities. They become mega cities and will collapse under their own weight. So we need many more new peripheral cities, charter cities, if you will. I do think that there is value to creating more self-governing structures. But obviously there has to be a seed, whether it's government or some developer who starts the process of creating these in a efficient, well-modeled way. DLF and Gurgaon is one example of a developer, but Chandigarh and the government is another example of a city coming up. And I think we need many more of these. We have to be open. I would suggest that we have different models, see what works, and see what doesn't work. But absolutely, I think we do need new cities. And for example, around Hyderabad, there's a huge ring road. And the talk now is building sort of little peripheral cities around these ring roads with maybe some cluster of industries in each city. That's something that certainly can be coordinated by the government. Doesn't have to be built by the government, but can be coordinated, and would be a way of taking off some of the burden from Hyderabad. and keeping Hyderabad livable as opposed to making it overly clogged. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of Rohit.
Thank you so much for doing it.
Very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Have a good day. 2 more questions, and then we let you enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
That's a promise. All right. The first one is from my young colleague, Shipra. That's given the rapid economic transformation of Shenzhen in China from a rural village to a global economic powerhouse, what factors contributed to its success? And how can these insights be applied to India's growth and development?
So this is, I mean, this is sort of connected to the question that Raghu answered. And I think there was a realization of this. I think there has been a realization of this at least since the Vajpayee government time, and even in the Manmohan Singh government time, and even in this government's time. If you saw the earlier, and we mentioned this in the book, the earlier policies, there was a big emphasis. I think Mr. Venkaiah Naidu was the urban minister or something. The realization that we need to make smart cities, and there was a lot of buzz around it. It kind of fizzled out because it is very, very hard to do. Because you're basically trying to do something. I don't want to use unorganic, but like through an interventionist policy and say, okay, this is where the population should go. This is where I want to develop a city. India has done it. So I think the very good examples of a public-private partnership that went very well is, of course, Jamshedpur. It's not of the size of what Shipra is suggesting with Shenzhen, but so what worked in their favor is something we talk about in the book also, is that certain things like building large scale infrastructure, of course, can be done much more easily if you're not a democracy, but you can basically dictate what land will be used for. So China has continued to have that policy where the government has the first right of owning land almost all over the country. So you can decide kind of how things are structured. But I think one thing that people underappreciate in the China model is that there was actually also a great level of decentralization, what in the book we call a kind of competitive cronyism, which is that actually lots of cities were competing with each other for their own transformation, and incentives were built in. So actually, as a local administrator, if you were able to attract a lot of industry and clock higher rates of growth for your community and your city, then you actually were promoted within the Communist Party. So Deng Xiaoping was very clear-headed in how he thought even the party incentive structure should actually respond to growth-generating policies. Now, we have to now, the next part of the question is much tougher, is that what parts of these policies can be applied to the Indian context? I think a direct mapping, of course, cannot be made because of the political and societal structures are different. But however, as I just said, with Jamshedpur being a good example, Pune actually also obviously didn't go from a rural to a mega city, but we have transformed smaller cities into economic centers. And we need many more transformations like this, especially in the heartland. If you look at the IPL, for example, right? Like there's like almost a blackout in the middle of the country, and in terms of where teams are, because they are actually just synonymous with where the economic might of the country is. And so a lot of this development actually needs to be pushed to the Meerats and like for example, Coimbatore is a very good example, and not a very large city, but actually is an economic powerhouse and has continued to be so. Kanpur used to be one, is no longer. Ludhiana used to be one, but is no longer. So we need many more tier 2, tier 3 cities, and then we can dream of transforming rural into urban.
That is an interesting point that you make. I mean, I'm a health economist by training, but a China hand by inclination. So there are quite a few interesting things that are coming out, like the logic of governance in China, so on and so forth. I think finance in China is very, very complicated than what we like to look at, especially if you look at the Mandarin reports that are put out. So I think finance in China is a whole esoteric entity that, I mean, I love it. A lot of other people might not, but then that's fair. Last question before we end this. It's from Neeti. How do you view the role of technology in shaping the future of economies, and what policies should be in place to harness its benefits while mitigating potential risks, and you were thanked for the session. So, yes.
So I mean, this is a very broad level question. So, of course, technology is the way. I mean, if you see India already, when we talk about structural transformation, India, to some extent, was able to skip the standard route of structural transformation on the back of technology. If you look at one of the things we talk about often in the book is don't think of services just as direct services, but also services embedded in manufacturing is actually a large component of how manufacturing is going to be done. And this is basically enabled by technology. And most of Indian startups actually that are doing well, even if they are actually related to manufacturing, of course, during services, they are doing some kind of leapfrog because they're using technology smartly. Now, one of the things that excites us and scares us in technology is, of course, artificial intelligence. And there are no two ways that some jobs are going to be lost because of artificial intelligence. India must be prepared for it. I think what people underappreciate is two things. One is that it actually takes time for any technology to really displace jobs at the level at which actually we have made stories in our head. A good example of this is when I was in graduate school, there was the talk that the largest employer of unskilled, one of the largest employers, I think it is the largest employer of unskilled male, especially amongst males in the US labor, is actually truck driving. And there was a lot of talk that this job was going to go away in 2009-10 when I was in graduate school, and it hasn't. Because they just don't feel comfortable letting trucks at such high speeds being driven by machines. So that's not just to say that in 10 years from now it won't, but just to say that when it takes much longer than we actually initially think in our techno utopia about how much long it will take for some jobs to go away. The other thing I think that is also underappreciated is that when a technology becomes very good, it reduces what economists call the marginal cost of its access. So what is an example of this? Think of the, I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember the floppy drive. When we first started storing things on computers, it was like 5 files, 6 files, 7 files. This is how expensive data storage was. But as data storage became significantly cheap, almost all of the modern industries were centered around it. So, people, whenever you say Amazon, people think of retail. Actually, Amazon's largest profit-making unit is Amazon Web Services, on which almost all of the startups are based. So the fact that you actually don't need to store data as in CPUs in your basement, they can actually just be stored on Amazon Web Services, just opened up the whole domain of businesses. So this is just to say that when AI makes certain things very cheap, the demand, for example, for writing code is going to go up because it's become much cheaper to write code. So technology is going to take away some jobs. It's also going to bring in many opportunities as far as India is concerned. And then we also give examples in the book about how technology is actually the only way we see how India will be able to crack the problem of primary education at the scale that is required, or even higher education, because the demand is not keeping up with the level of skilled people who can actually impart that knowledge. So you will have to actually rely more and more on technology, and we give examples of that in the book. And thank you. Yeah, thank you for hosting us. It was a real pleasure, and I hope you read the book and please engage with the ideas. We keep saying to people, keep engaged with, even if you disagree with us, that's fine. Keep engaging with the ideas.
I had to read 4 of these to interview for this session. So I read this book. I'm going to read it again. Thank you very much for writing it. Thank you to our board for being here. We had almost everybody. And thank you for doing it while you are
Thank you.
I presume.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lamba. Thank you, Amogh sir. Thank you, Raju sir, Sandhya ma'am, and everyone. Thank you for joining in. Thank you.